Where does art come from? How is it funded? Why is it funded? What are the consequences of different types of funding? How does art survive in an age of austerity? And how do we value art?
There are three main ways in which the arts are funded. These are state public funding, private and corporate investment, and philanthropic and community projects. This documentary explored the effects different forms of funding have on the production of art, including artistic constraints, economic pressures, and the political impact and wider social implications of creative endeavours. We aim to get a snapshot of Exeter, investigating how recent cuts to state funding for the arts have affected the artistic community as a whole.
Now, Royal Albert Hall Museum is a local government museum. It is funded through public funding. It finds it incredibly difficult to get outside sponsorship, and even this exhibition, which was the inaugural show when the museum reopened, it had been closed for a 4-year refill. So, people packing in. It could not find sponsorship at all.
The Exeter Northcote Theatre is basically the theatre for Exeter and Devon. Ticket sales represent almost 50% of our income. The rest comes from the Arts Council of England, who give us a small amount of money comparatively to other theatres doing the same thing. The University of Exeter, we're very fortunate, they put some money in as well, and the Exeter City Council. After that, we raise a little bit of money from our audience, and that is going to have to significantly increase in the future.
So the theatre's funded through a bar, so 95% of our income is earned income, which is very significant for arts organisations in this country. Very different from other arts organisations in this country. We have received Arts Council funding for projects in the past, and in April of this year, for the first time, we received some core funding from the City Council, which we got slightly through the back door. So we got £5,000 from a thing called the New Homes Bonus, and we're hoping that will increase as the years go on.
The hub kind of started off with me sort of having a big kiln, because I'm a ceramicist. You have a big kiln. Yeah, the hub pretty much developed from me knowing I needed a big space to work as a studio, and so I found a commercial property that I've sort of developed into, and it's completely self-funded. It runs off subletting artist studio space. It runs off me running sort of workshops. It runs off me having 3 jobs as well, working in other community centres, sort of working with other artists doing sort of commissions as well, private commissions.
Arts and culture costs the taxpayer 14 pence per week to support state-funded projects, but 60% of all arts organisations' total income comes from donations, ticket sales, sponsorship and philanthropy. So, how does state funding affect art?
The Arts Council was last reviewing how it allocated its funding. The theatre wasn't as strong a venue as other people around the country, and it really lost out. So, which means the audiences in Exeter, frankly, lose out. And you could ask the question, is it fair that the taxpayers in Exeter get a tiny proportion of the Arts Council spend? Cultural activity is really vital to the health and well-being of the economy. Also, the creative industries are the second biggest contributor to this nation's wealth. So we are vitally, vitally important. And we are world leaders. We are world-leading exporters of creative people and creative ideas. Hollywood is full of people who started their careers in regional theatres in Britain. The Olympics last year, the real success of the Olympics was the brilliant opening ceremonies, and they were made possible because of people who had started out in new theatres in places like this.
So I got a bit guilty, having just received this money, having lobbied for this money for quite a long time. Then when we got it, I felt a bit guilty when I went to Waitrose to buy my food, that people who worked in Waitrose were contributing through their council tax payments to our subsidy, and potentially would not be that interested in going to the theatre. So the idea that I came up with was that if they wanted to see a show here for nothing, then they could. And I'm a member of a thing called the Young Vic Genesis Directors Scheme, and what they do on press nights is they invite you to be there in the bar, and if people have cancelled at last minute, which tends to happen at press nights, you get in for nothing, because they want to have a full house of young, exciting people. So I thought we could do a similar thing, which is that if if you've never been to the bike shed before, and if there are any seats left in the house, which often there are, you can see a show for free. And because we run a bar as well, I'm kind of aware of the fact that the economics are very different. With a bar, if we don't sell a bottle of beer, we can resell it tomorrow. If we have an empty seat in the theatre, we can't sell it tomorrow. It's just, we're effectively throwing the beer down the drain, throwing the chair down.
I thank God that the local authority in Exeter has spent millions on the museum, still held the line about not charging admittance, which would be the obvious thing for them to do to make up the shortfall. So it is democratising culture, which we want, but at a huge cost to local government and finance. Okay. So what the public sees in all these cases is some sort of compromise. And although you do your best to paper over crowds and make a credible story of what's available, you are inhibited imaginatively and creatively by lack of funding.
Dom and Seth raised an important question. What is the value of art? And indeed, how can we measure it? The value of art is not easily deduced. You have to take into account a variety of factors, ranging from the political to the social and, of course, the economic.
It just seems to me that if you enter the argument on their own grounds in terms of economics, you're always going to at least have a very uphill struggle.
In this country, we've got very, very much better since the 1990s, really, of talking about the economic value of creativity and culture.
If you go to the Ram, the 2 doors down from the Ram is Ruby Burger Joint. I'm really interested in that place when it came up, so I went in and said, nice place here. Why did you put it here? And they said we put it here for 3 reasons. First reason because of Ram Museum. Second because of Exeter Central Station, and the third because of Exeter College. And I said, so the footfall and the numbers into Ram, that is important to you? They said, absolutely. So I think, within, I think it was 9 months, Ram had over 40,000 people through its doors. Again, so that's making that the economic argument.
We went to the streets to find out what art brings to our city centre. Whilst people may not directly engage with art, they nevertheless appreciate the indirect improvement to the environment from public sculptures, general creative works, horticulture and street singers.
We're just wondering what you think works of art like sculptures and like other commissions add to the city as a whole.
Well, they break it up a bit, otherwise you lose the sort of, I was going to say, evolution of a town. You haven't got the organic growth of the big spaces and things. This is still lacking actually. Things like a little booth selling newspapers or somebody selling burgers on the corner. Too sterile. So the more different bits of sculpture, art, trees, whatever you've got, better.
Anything that improves the environment visually, particularly if you're going to do it in the city centre, where it improves the environment, makes people come into the city centre because they enjoy being there, the more they'll spend money.
They make it not just a commercial space. You'd notice if you were to take the art away.
Yeah.
You'd notice it negatively.
Yeah.
I feel like sculptures, seeing things like drama and all of this adds like a creative side to me. It makes me think of the ideas of art and sculpture and what they inspire and what things mean, and that interpretation of people's creative instincts, which I don't quite get in through my degree, and that inspires a particular environment to discuss the arts, which I don't really find I have, and stimulates that side of my brain and that side of my learning.
It would affect me a great deal if the North Court, say, were to declare, and this country must support its arts.
And there are a very good series of amateur choirs and things for this country. You tend to think of places like Huddersfield as having choral societies. There's nothing to what Exeter's got.
They make you question about how we behave and how we should behave and things people do. But just the sheer enjoyment of what you see. Yeah, there's definitely pleasure. There's a lot of pleasure in seeing. I look at some artists like Matisse's work, and just like the beautiful colours he has, and you just enjoy seeing that. Seeing what those people have.
Whenever I come back to Exeter, I do I am struck by what a different place it is.
So, there's clearly a demand for the arts, but how do cuts to arts funding dictate the responses of the art organisations?
From the outside, our programme doesn't look that different to other regional theatres of a similar size around the country, but we have a fraction, we probably have about a tenth of the money that most of them are operating on. So we do have to be quite clever and quite careful, and you have to put in things that you know are going to pay a bit of money, because a play with 16 people on it, on stage, and only 460 seats in the auditorium, there's no way you can pay the wage bill of those performers for a week. So, you know, it will cost money. Even if we sell out, it will cost money to put on. That means we don't have any control over what the product is. So we might think it would be really brilliant to programme a particular type of work. And indeed, our relationship with the university means there are certain types of work that it would be great to put on because of the specific student population.
But is art political? And is state funding necessary to produce political art, or does it restrict it? And is political art being produced today?
Very few artists these days make political art works. But in terms of artistic responses to that, it's almost as though, and this sounds all very, very cynical, that the idea of a political art is less obvious to artists these days as a thing to do. If you can imagine political art as a fish that needs water to swim in, it's like the course being trained. So, yeah, I think in terms of arts funding, to go back to the centre of your question, I can't imagine a situation where funding would be denied simply because it was political. I can imagine, however, that it would be more difficult to acquire funding because of what Julia was saying this morning. Most people have money to give on prestige projects.
I suspect social relevance does come out of no public funding. So if you look at countries like Egypt or Syria or Libya, what their artists are doing with not just no state support, but in some situations no state, actually it's socially considerably more relevant than the huge majority of art that gets made in this country, in my opinion. And the reason for that is it's coming from a place of oppression or a place of passion, that people have something to say so powerfully and so strongly that money has absolutely nothing to do with it. What we did was we built a website, crystal.net, which allowed all of these people and the people who didn't have funding to list themselves as being in the theatre industry on a website along with all of these other people. So that instead of the map of theatre industry being, I always use the phrase, it's easy to find a motorway from a terraced house. It's very hard to find a terraced house from a motorway. Very, very well signposted, everyone knows about the regional theatre. Very few people know about the little people. Actually, the little people make up the critical mass. They don't in terms of money, but they do in terms of energy.
In our society, there is a multiplicity of voices and ideologies, where democracy and stability are often taken for granted. This doesn't mean that we can't produce art that is subversive to the social structures around us. In fact, art can only survive through a collaboration of various structures. The value of art is clearly not that easily deduced. There are lots of factors, ranging from the economic to the social to the political. Think about the influence of a cultural organisation in terms of its indirect economic value, draws its economic benefits into focus.
Yeah, there is this well-founded core. It's when the fringe gets taken away that, of course, the core then becomes very conservative.
Let's nurture the progression and development of ideas. I think is something we both believe is really important, and one of the key ways to stimulating a creative and cultural economy within any place.
Is the arts worth funding? Without art, without visual stimulation, without sort of cultural communication, communication through images, through text, through the arts, cultural exchange wouldn't occur. Society would be lost, and I think that there are many people in society, including parts of the government, that really need to reassess how valued the arts is.